All right. Now, Bill, at this point, I'm thinking I take down the slides so that you can share your screen, correct?
Yeah. Yeah, when we're ready, I'd like to give an introduction to the actual workshop component here. And then we'll move into a more interactive phase.
All right, so I'm just going to say that I'm going to turn things over to Bill Manley, who is going to lead more of the actual workshop proper, with possibly some intervention from me at key points.
Well, thanks everyone for hanging in there. Whoa. And so this is, and we're now entering after that talk, the workshop component on optimizing polar observing with asset level metadata interoperability across networks. So we were going to have some introductions in the room and online. I don't know if that's feasible. I can't see the room. What do you think, Shannon? Introductions?
I've changed the view for you, so you can see the room.
Bill, including me, there's 27 people here. That might take an awful lot of time.
Yeah.
What I would recommend is just going ahead, and if people want to comment or raise their hands, if you could all just say your name and which organization you're with before you ask your question or make your comment, that would be really helpful. Is that okay, Bill?
Yeah. That's great. Thank you. Okay, good. And also be aware, there are many people online as well. And I think we're all good there as well. So there is an agenda with minutes that we can all look at and contribute to. If you're on Zoom, I just posted that to the chat. And I will share my screen. And so we have a little something there to look at. And make that much bigger, hopefully. Let's see here. And we really appreciate this opportunity. So for this workshop, we're going to go through a group review of ROPON. ROPON, the registry, was just released, I think, a couple of weeks ago. And so it would be great if you all kicked the tires, gave us some feedback. This was just phase 1 pilot, and be helpful to get feedback from you all about what to add or improve in the future, bug fixes, etc. And then we want to have a prompted discussion about a variety of related topics and concepts. Things are a little bit different in this observing asset realm than with data sets. So there's some things worthy of discussion there. And then behind ROPON is this network level metadata model. And be great to have you all review that. And then at the end, if there's time, we have a new way of suggesting networks to add to ROPON using a Google form. And so we thought we'd put that in your court to add or suggest other networks or discovery tools. So I'd like to give a quick history about POWIG, the Polar Observing Assets Working Group. So some of us that were working under the Arctic Research Mapping application and the Arctic Observing Viewer, we've been working for many years to try to get a comprehensive perspective to optimize field research and observing, to streamline with co-located resources across agencies and even internationally. But it was very difficult to obtain the data, if you will, the metadata relating to actual field project locations or where measurements were being taken repeatedly from different agencies or from different networks or organizations. And So Craig Tweedy and Allison Gaylord and I submitted a short statement to the Arctic Observing Summit, and drawing from the idea, the lessons learned from the polar data community about how this information can be truly interoperable and fair. And based on the recommendations in that white paper, SAON established this working group about 3 years ago, I think, under the SAON Committee on Observations and Networks. And so we think about once a month, and hoping to bridge the divide, something of a divide, maybe a chasm between the polar data and polar observing communities, and then to make observing related more information more fair. And so as Shannon indicated, feel free to sign up at polarobservingassets.org to be involved or just to receive some updates. So let's see how this goes here. So I encourage you all on your own devices, or as I explore around, you all can see my screen, correct?
Yeah.
And
Yes.
I'm going to put the URL in the chat. To go into the registry, to test the search bar, the different filters, you can see that there's only 20 networks and discovery tools in there right now. Click on one of these cards. Let's go, for example, into DIMES SDR. I'm going to open that in a new tab for right now. And if you have any particular feedback on the registry, type it in the minutes or just raise your hand. Yeah. Any particular feedback on the registry?
I think
We have a question.
Øystein has his hand up.
Okay,
Hi,
good.
Øystein. I was wondering about the governance of the information you got in there. So you mentioned actually feeding new information into the system. But once you have the system, information may be outdated or wrong. So how do you make changes to the information that is in the system?
I think that's a really important comment here, and relates to various ideas that we've explored as a group, as a team, toward what to do next about populating and maintaining ROPON after this pilot phase. I actually have a slide on this for later under discussion topics. Can we come back to that?
Is that all right, Steve?
Let's come.
Yeah.
Yes.
Let's come back to that. Any other? Yeah.
Yeah, it's Frank Nietzsche, US Antarctic Program Data Center. So I have maybe a more basic question, since this is something it's new to me. But so we have a lot of different levels of things in your catalog. For example, link to RMAP. This is basically like a location of different research projects. What I think that's not necessary. I mean, what you looking? I'm wondering what you're looking for with your polar observing network. Is this like locations of what research is done where, or you're looking more for like observing assets, like seismological station, weather stations, where ships are going, moorings, or this kind of assets? I mean, if you look to this and you go to whatever, like the RMAP, you get a lot of, like, all the list of funded projects, but not of all of them are like a fixed, like asset or station. That's maybe just like a group of biologists doing some, going where, making some observation in a peatland somewhere, as an example. So I don't know, it could be a little confusing what the different discovery tools or whatever provide. Or the ConMap is also, it's station data, but if you go to the website, it's more about the organization rather than about the tool. So I'm just wondering what you're trying to get in this database.
And I'll also follow up on that, because I was thinking, where would the Australian Antarctic Data Center fall in this? Because I mean, we're a historical archive, but then separately we have our science programs, and then we have an observing program as well, and then remediation programs. So I'm just agreeing with Frank that it would be good to get some guidelines on sort of what would fit on a card, or what would need to be split across cards.
Interesting. Or in this case, individual landing pages, if relevant, for some of these things. Like, let's look at ComNap. I'm hearing a couple of great things here, and one is, does this landing page capture what's most relevant or important for a given goal or a target audience, if you will? I'm also hearing that there is quite a complexity in this space, because some of these networks and discovery tools convey or cover concepts that are quite different than others. Project locations versus, for example, individual platforms within WMO Oscar or something like that. So this is good. I think this will actually also come up in the discussion topics in a bit. Maybe we should just launch into that. Any other first impressions, the things that come to mind? Okay. So yeah, there's a lot to consider here in terms of the user experience with the registry, as well as the goals and target audience, as well as trying to get a handle on the categorization of what these things are and what they're tracking, what those concepts are, and how best to put that all together. And so, all right, good. So, and so I would like to then facilitate this discussion with some slides. So let's see if these all capture some of what you brought up and more. And again, I'm assuming you're seeing the slide discussion topics. And
yes, we are.
Okay, thank you. So I might be kicking a dead horse, if you will, here, but I just wanted to make sure that it's clear enough, or is there a clear distinction between having metadata, having there be full-on fair interoperability for metadata describing scientific data sets versus structured information metadata about observing assets, things such as sites, projects, buoys, boreholes, etc., that are not data sets from those sites, projects, and boreholes, but actually structured information about those things themselves, and as being distinct from the data sets that come out of those observing assets. Does that make sense?
You're
Are
getting
there any
nods, Bill.
questions about this distinction between scientific data sets and observing assets as being what we're hoping to improve the metadata interoperability for? Okay, good. So to be clear then, obviously, kicking a dead horse, I guess, ROPON is not a registry of data repositories. It is not a registry of data repositories. Yeah. And so instead, we're within ROPON, we're trying to provide a resource that puts in one place discovery level information about observing networks and discovery tools. So this was in the presentation, and there's a few things to touch on here, perhaps. There's a distinction between these two things, observing networks and discovery tools. And because I don't know if you all are familiar with, say, RMAP or DIMES or ESAFIQ, they're not really networks per se, right? But we wanted to include them, particularly because we're trying to move towards an integrated way of compiling or aggregating structured information about assets. So one question is there a better term for what might best be described accurately and specifically as asset level aggregating metadata catalogs for these things that are not networks? Or discovery tools, does that work? Discovery portals. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, go ahead, Chantal.
Just speaking from the polder perspective and getting feedback on the classification of federated search not really being super researcher friendly, I'm a little hesitant to recommend the super descriptive asset level aggregating metadata catalogs. I mean, it's great for the technical side, but other than that, it might not be as easy to continue to say that in all your upcoming presentations.
In that same vein, I think archives is a little too general. That can apply to a lot of things that are probably beyond what you're envisioning.
Yes. So
yeah, that whole line of archives, inventories, directories, and indexes. Yeah, I'd probably avoid that one. So, and unless you had a descriptor with catalogs, yeah, same with that one. It's probably a little too general.
Okay.
Awesome.
The only thing that the only thing that I'd sort of ask is, you say in your discovery tools, portals or organizations, so that implies that it's more than a portal. So if you're wondering about using the term discovery portal, your description there, it suggests that it is more than just a portal.
Yeah. A lot of these things that we have in mind, we can come up with more, including, RMAP, ESAFIQ, PolarDex, DIMES. Maybe they're just portals. Maybe they're all portals. Perhaps it could help for the group to kind of go through the content in ROPON as an aside and try to figure out, okay, which ones are observing networks, which ones are discovery portals.
You might look at revising, this is Shannon, sorry, Bill. You might look at revising the definition and switching it with if it became discovery portals, it could be tools or organizations, because I think tools could be encompassed by portals.
I like that. That seems good. Hopefully some of this is getting into the minutes, and I'll remind that those are online. Feel free to raise your hand or type in the chat.
Yeah, we have Chantal Verhey taking minutes.
Awesome. Okay. So one related thing is within ROPON, this registry, should we include funders? Originally, we had the definition being systems or organizations that coordinate, conduct, or support observation and monitoring. And it was suggested not too long ago that we change that and remove the word support, because do we want to include in the registry funders that support these things? And here we're thinking about funding programs, Horizon 2020, the US NSF AON program, national agencies. Because this is phase one, fairly new, evolving almost as we speak. I believe the consensus is to not include funders.
Well,
Any
I have a
thoughts on that?
question to that.
Sure.
Yeah, I have one. It's Shannon again. I would like to know, can anybody think of a good reason to include a funder where it's important?
There you go. That's a good way to say it.
It's Jonathan. I was thinking it seems like it's a bit of a fork. I would recommend not having it because it's kind of a different object to review the funders. They won't have sort of maps or data on assets or infrastructure or things like I would think, like the NSF or NSERC or the ARC. They would have projects and programs, but yeah, so my recommendation is I really can't. I think it's a separate fork.
And some of these, funders, for example, that's better handled probably by Crossref with the funder registry, for example. All right, and I don't have this on the slide, but in addition to funders, and this gets to the complexity of, okay, let's talk about that for a moment. Within this community some time ago, there was a healthy debate about what is data? How do you define data for a data set? And that was interesting because when you get into it, it's pretty complex. But I would argue that within this observing realm, in terms of platforms or instruments or sites or even projects or campaigns or planned activities or scientific cruises or even the initiatives themselves, there's just so many more concepts than a simple data set concept, if you will. And so how do we, provide some order to that chaos, and how do we categorize these things in terms of observing assets or even what's included in ROPON? So it's been suggested, and we've tried a little bit to come up with a hierarchy of some of these things. Is it possible, really? And another thing to throw in here, okay, so for funders, what do we do? In terms of including in ROPON, what do we do about programs? So here we're thinking about things like SAON. Should SAON itself be in this registry of polar observing networks? Or USAON, COOBS, Arctic Passion? Should it be a separate record and card and landing page in ROPON? What do we do with programs, which are not all that well defined? Any thoughts there?
Well, it's Jonathan again. I think on a similar basis of the previous comment, it just seems like it would be a different fork. So you've got, you do have your funders as a fork, but then programs would be different. It's just sort of a different concept, at least to me. You're observing networks as a coherent unit makes sense, but yeah, that would be my recommendation, is that it's sort of a different category.
Question, please. So I agree with Jonathan. It would be more similar to this difference between a data set and an observational set as well. So it's information that should be linked, but not necessarily using the same model to describe it.
Yeah. Okay, good. And yet it somehow still makes sense to include both observing networks and discovery portals, say. Yeah. Okay. So this is helpful input. I was wondering if there were any questions about how we came up with these definitions and categorizations for asset types. Any questions based on what was presented earlier? This is tricky.
No hands raised, Bill.
Okay. And just to clarify a little bit, the way we came up with that was, oh, go back. Yeah. I can't see the room very well, so definitely yell
There's a
out,
question
please.
in the chat, Bill.
Oh, okay. Would it be possible to have some kind of project repository and then including links to the published data from each project? Yeah, so would it be possible to have some kind of project repository and then including links to the published data from each project? So this, I think, speaks to how there are some project level metadata catalogs within ROPON currently, and there's many more to add in the future. And depending on what that is, for example, the Arctic Research Mapping Application, the various other project level catalogs. Let's just look at that for a second if we can. So we go home, we filter under asset type equals projects. There's the AMAP project directory, et cetera, et cetera. Some of these, it just depends on that entity, whether or not they have links to published data or say publications. And I believe BOEM does. Some of these do not. I think that's maybe we would all agree, preaching the choir. That's where we want to go, is have projects linked to data, projects linked to publications, projects linked to sites. And it's not always hierarchical. So we want all this stuff to go both ways, or all ways, and dimensional.
Bill, we had a follow-up question in the room from Frank.
Frank again. Well, it's more like a comment than a question. I mean, we do this already for NSF-funded Antarctic project. We have a project. Each award has a project page where links to the data sets, links to the publication, as far as we know that. I mean, that gets back to, should there be like the data center included? I mean, I'm not sure if this is something you want to include in your observing network, because then it's getting back to, it's going to be a registry of all funded projects. If I don't know if this is the goal of this thing. If you want to include all, like, whatever funded project it is and where's like the data for that, I think that's maybe a little, I don't know what your scope is, but it's a little different. I think I hear what you're saying. Like the assets.
And for example, RMAP, so you might be familiar, I guess you're familiar with that. It's a aggregating project level metadata catalog. It's a tool to find information about many hundreds, if not thousands, of research projects across the Arctic, mostly funded by NSF, but also other federal agencies. And it had the goal at one point of being, international in scope. And RMAT tried for a long time to have data sets linked from projects or publications linked from projects. And I